Welcome. And I'm going to tell about a special event we had a year ago, actually 14 months ago now. But this is a book that was written about the event and many other things, which I shall explain. It's written by a friend of mine, Siggy Second-Jumper, and I've only had the pleasure of meeting him a couple times, but talked to him on email and more. But anyway, I was in the Army and where's my yes, okay. Try and get this to work. Ah, there we go. I was in the Army at Fort Huachuca from 1990 to 92. Fort Huachuca in southeast corner of Arizona. I was there during Desert Storm, but anyway, while I was there, I enjoyed researching the local Apache history of the Chiricahua Apaches. And Fort Huachuca was established as part of that time period to take part in the removal and the war with the Apaches in the 1870s and 80s. I was struck with the similarity between the Chiricahua Apache and the Seminole and Miccosukes of Florida. Both tribes fought fiercely against the United States. They fought the United States to a standstill, and both tribes have a remnant that refused to leave their homeland. Both retain traditional beliefs while being isolated and resisting outside influence. I thought of the Apache as desert Seminoles in a way. Oh, by the way, my barracks was on the next street over behind these historic barracks that you see in the background. I had quite a view of that mountain in the background. And so, anyway, Siggy Second-Jumper, when I got out of the Army, uh, eventually got a job in Southwest Florida on the edge of Big Cypress and the Everglades. And one day at the Swamp Safari, I found this book by Siggy Second-Jumper. You can see the uh, oh, you can see the book here, and Siggy himself, very nice person, uh, searching for his bloodline, treasured stories of the Seminoles and Chiricahua Apaches, which piqued my interest because also the two tribes that I have researched a lot about. So, with interest in both these tribes and in the Southwest, I bought a copy of the book and read it. I think in a day or two. I couldn't put it down. It was pleasantly surprised seeing the connection between the two cultures of people that I've researched as well. Also, I was very familiar with many of the places that Siggy has described, except I've never been to Cuba. Siggy Second-Jumper's story really resonated with me. I feel that, we're brothers of another mother or kindred spirits, whatever that's defined as. And Siggy researched his family. Um, his ancestors were at Fort Marion in St. Augustine and taken as human trafficking or human slavery, secreted down to Cuba and worked on the plantation there. Um, I think that was his great grandfather. Then in the 1950s, Siggy's family left Cuba and came to Miami, returned to the United States. And this book is about his journey reconnecting with his family and his culture. Siggy Second-Jumper's second book, so play on words, came out right before our event in April 2022. This time he had 10 years more of extensive research into his Apache family and ancestors and numerous connections that he found with his family and relatives he got in contact with on the Mescalero Apache Reservation in New Mexico. I find it interesting for me because of my research and the reading of the history that I've done. But more importantly, he makes a firm case, I believe, of the Spanish attempt to exterminate the Apache by tearing them away from their homes and family, separating them, forcing them to walk and work hundreds of miles away from the sacred land that they came from. And actually, putting them in work which amounts to slavery. And I believe this policy was continued by General Crook in the 19th century to try to defeat and exterminate the Apache, and Crook nearly succeeded. I believe Siggy makes a good argument that Crook continued the policy of the conquistadors, making this Apache Holocaust. The Apache went from thousands in the Southwest to uh, those who remained, who left Florida as prisoners at Fort Marion, went to Mobile, Alabama, and then went to Fort Lawton, Oklahoma. In the end, only about 200 of them still survived. They became prisoners of war. Some of the young were secreted to Cuba in a human trafficking ring, and they were abducted and just written on the books as having died in Florida. Siggy identified at least 4 towns of Apache descendants in Cuba who had been taken there since the time of the Spanish. And this is a story that's been untold about these people who have been taken from their homes and forced into a life, into a different land. Siggy's third book, The Seminole Trail of Tears, The Journey of Healing and Closure, First-Hand Chronicles of the Oklahoma Seminoles. These 2 books led to Siggy's third book. He starts out dipping into the history of the first 2 books to set the stage and context, and then he goes to the Seminole War Historians Convocation that we had in Jupiter, Loxahatchee in April 2022. Siggy had a dream of helping organize this event and meeting the Florida and Western Seminoles back on their sacred ground in Florida, where their diaspora and splitting of their people happened in 1838, where the Seminole Trail of Tears started, and over 700 people were surrounded and put in chains and sent to the Western Territory. And interesting, try to organize this conference that we had a year ago. Even today, there are some with strong feelings, even after 184 years after it happened. One thing that Siggy covers real nicely is describing all the bands of the Western Seminoles. That's like family groups or townships, the Harjo Band or the Newcomers Band. They're currently active in Oklahoma. I've never seen this written up anywhere. It's very helpful to have the different groups described to me. It's a welcome addition in my library. Because of this, it's new information. Now, for the natives, history is not viewed as linear as in the Western mindset. There are some things in the book that's not necessarily in chronological order, but I'm okay with that. It's not important so much when it happened, what happened, and why it happened. This book also covers some things that late in the 1800s and early 1900s, a lot of history books on the Seminoles cover the war or the recent history and don't really cover this time period as much, which I'm glad they did. Makes it another reason this is a good addition to my library, because between the Civil War and up to World War II, the Seminoles who remained in Florida almost became a non-people, pretty much ignored, hunted down, and the information that you find a lot is in the newspaper archives, not so much in books. And I knew about this because I've been researching these newspaper stories from the late 1800s. You just have to understand, though, who is reporting that there's a lot of racial bias and stereotype that appears in the articles and a lot of tropes. So, you just have to read through that and see what's going on. This postcard of Chief Tiger. Tom Tiger was the leader of the Seminoles in the late 1800s. He fought in the Third Seminole War, and then he was killed by a lightning strike and buried deep in the swamp. A scam artist or sideshow carny came from up north, came down and robbed the grave of Tom Tiger. He tried to sell the bones to the Smithsonian, who declined, and were not so sure about the provenance of where this was coming from. So the man took him and put him in a sideshow, traveling exhibit in a sideshow. The Seminoles were furious for this desecration of the grave of their leader. The Istachati or the Indians of Florida threatened to start the Fourth Seminole War if they did not get the remains back, and sent out a message that was printed in the newspapers. If we don't get them back within a month, we're going to just start killing every white man we come across. So eventually the remains got back. I think might have taken more than a month, but nobody was killed, no bloodshed. Fortunately, there was a peaceful outcome. And that's covered in the book as well as Polly Parker. Very well known to the Seminoles, maybe not known if you're not familiar with Seminole history. This elderly matriarch is said to have lived over 100 years. Many Seminoles in Florida are descended from her. At the end of the Third Seminole War, the ship, the Gray Cloud, left Tampa Bay to go to New Orleans with about 180 Seminoles aboard. In 1858, the ship stopped for wood and water at St. Mark's in the Florida Panhandle. At this time, some of the women were given permission to go off the ship and on the shore and look for herbs and medicine plants. At the time, there's really not much settlement in the area. And of course, they had a plan to at least have one of them try to escape. Polly Parker escaped at that point, or ran down the peninsula, made it back to Okeechobee eventually. And I added in an obituary of Polly Parker from the Wichita Daily Eagle, November 9th, 1922. So you can see when she died, it was in papers all over the country. Earlier that year, in February, March of 1922, Polly Parker was a guest at the state convention of the American Legion in West Palm Beach. And the American Legion is the Association of Veterans. I'm a member of that myself, and it really means a lot to me that you have a Seminole that fought against the United States as a honored guest at a convention of American veterans. So then the book discusses the Seminole Wars Convocation that we had. And what is that? Well, in 1838, there was two battles, and they're commemorated at Loxahatchee River Battlefield Park in Palm Beach County, north of Jupiter, as you go towards Indiantown. These two battles, the first one was Powell's Battle, Lieutenant Powell leading a joint Army-Navy detachment, went up the Loxahatchee River searching for Indian villages. They're ambushed and nearly wiped out and beat it back. And so that led, eventually, General Jessup got word of that. He was coming down the coast. 9 days later, there's another battle on January 24th, 1838, when General Jessup had the largest battle of the Second Seminole War, involving 1,600 Army soldiers, several hundred Seminole Miccosukes and Black Seminole warriors. And they had this major battle. I don't consider anybody as winning a battle. I don't think anybody won the war. Costly on both sides, but the participants of the battle, the Seminoles and Black Seminoles left, and the Army left, and it was over. And the battle was forgotten for years until in the 1980s and 90s they started to look for it. I was at the site here when there's a stop by when the excavation was going on in about 1997. Same time the Ah-Tah-Thi-Ki Museum opened. And so these historical markers are here at the park where the location of the battle was. We start out our historic convocation with a tour of the lighthouse. This is my favorite lighthouse in Florida, in Jupiter. I think it's about 110 steps up to the top. Of course, you have to climb up that ancient sand dune that the lighthouse is on top of to get to the top of the tower. So it is some exercise. And I got there when the Florida and Oklahoma Seminoles were touring the place. And two of the Oklahoma Seminole veterans climbed the lighthouse with me. And everyone else kind of declined. So, hey, we made it. But I really enjoy this lighthouse. And so then we had the Seminole War Convocation on Saturday and Sunday. Representatives of the Seminole Tribe of Florida, the Oklahoma Seminole Nation, some of the speakers here on the left. And anyway, the Seminole War Convocation is an event hosted by the Seminole Wars Foundation. Every 2 years, it's in a different location. And we had picked this as the Jupiter because of the Battle of Loxahatchee and the annual event, that commemorations that go on there. And so Siggy Second-Jumper, he got involved and try to help bring the Oklahoma Seminoles here. And having, I don't know, a journey of healing, which I think is a good thing to do. The convocation was held. We had the speakers and the history here in the Civic Center. It's a first-rate facility. Speakers were historians, archaeologists, representatives of the different tribes, and Siggy as well, and myself. I did a talk. There was also representatives present. There was Barbara Osceola of the Miccosukee tribe, and even a Florida Creek quiet, and who was quiet in the audience. Both those tribes had a significant role in the Second Seminole War, but are often overlooked. Now on the right, you have Jake Tiger, who is the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, in charge of the Department of Cultural Preservation. This young man, you made the outfit that he's wearing, did a spectacular job. Not only that, there's a story which, if I can add in here, is not in the book, but it's about Jake's grandfather, who I knew back in the early 1990s. A member of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma came and participated at the Dade Battle reenactment, which I met him, Dwayne Miller. He had a vision of establishing a memorial in Tampa Bay to the Seminole tribe, bringing together the people again, and reconciliation for what happened the past 200 years. I thought that was a beautiful dream. Dwayne passed away a couple years ago. There is a monument now at the Tampa Bay History Center, so I guess that part became a reality. And this convocation was the other partial fulfillment of that, of the different tribes meeting, maybe for the first time in 184 years. It's possible that these groups have not met like this before, so it's a very historic and unique occasion. For myself, I've researched and studied Seminole War history for over 40 years, and I think this is a pinnacle event. Another event that comes close to this as being significant was the opening of the Ah-Tah-Thi-Ki Museum in 1997, which I also attended. Then Saturday evening, we took a visit, some of us, to the site of Fort Jupiter, where the Seminole encampment was, where you had over 700 Seminole and Black Seminole warriors they were surrounded and put in chains at this site. So, and where we are at, the area is now surrounded by luxury mansions, except a small wooded area, which is slated for development. It was pretty emotional for all in attendance to being standing on the very spot where their ancestors were encamped and surrounded and put in chains and where their freedom ended. Next Sunday, we continued to the Loxahatchee River Battlefield Park. Lewis Johnson on the left and Betty Osceola on the right. We gather that the park is emotional time and presentation by the Seminole tribe, the Seminole Nation, Miccosukee and Independent Seminoles. It started out with a march from the veterans, tribal members from the site of the actual battle over to the area where they're speaking right here. And as described in the book, one of the veterans leading the march saw something that's very significant and important in Seminole folklore. If you want to hear it, you'll have to get the book and hear the words printed from the person who saw that. I'm not going to speak for them on that. I think it's very personal and important thing that happened. And it's not my story to tell, but you'll just have to read it in the book. And so from there, we had presentations. That's Glenn Bakels on the left presentation. He's actually the one who really helped organize the event. Spent 2 years trying to pull this thing together. At times, it seems like it wasn't going to happen, but fortunately, persevered. I also saw Betty Osceola. I met her for the first time at the event. I was very familiar watching her videos on YouTube. So it was great to see her in person as well. Next, we had probably, for me, was, and many people, was the most emotional thing as the artifacts were brought out. These were collected at that vacant lot where they surrounded and captured the Seminoles. These are actual chains, artifacts that were dug from the site that the archaeologists found. This is a very emotional, physical reminder of what happened that day. Laying right here on the ground at the battlefield is the chains that held the people who were rounded up. For many, these are chains that could have been shackled to their ancestors and where their freedom ended as they are wrapped around the legs of their people. And many people physically cried. It is very emotional. And believe this is going to be burned in the minds of many people that were there. This event's probably impossible to describe without reading the book, so I really suggest to read it because Siggy did an excellent job describing the events at the convocation and the letters of some of the participants. So my description would pale in comparison. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that the press that was there, this appeared on the news and the paper for a day and then was probably forgotten. But I consider this a very important event in the tribal history, and it will not be forgotten by those participants who were here. It's, to me, it's just an overwhelming, significant, and emotional event. Now, if you want the book, I'll put a link down in the description below. And thank you for being here with the video. And I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll close it right here.